Welcome to the Geekcentric podcast, and welcome to our spoiler-free review for The Flash. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. Hello, I'm J-Law, but you can call me Justin, and if you're joining us for the first time, well, we are Geekcentric, a podcast covering the world of movies, TV shows, toys, collectibles, gaming, and all things geek-centric. Joining me for today's speedy review are two dudes who I think would have some pretty cool variants in the DCU multiverse. Darcy Hudson, Nate Shelton. How are you, boys?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm good. I feel like my multiverse counterparts in Marvel might be better.
Okay.
Nate,
How about yourself?
I'm gonna kill my multiverse in the DCU and just reset the whole thing.
Okay.
That's what I want to do.
All
okay,
right.
Justin. I entered the Speed Force and I'm not okay with it.
Yeah, well, we'll get into it. As I mentioned, today's spoiler-free review is for The Flash. If you don't know what this movie is about, let me get you up to speed. Warner Brothers Pictures presents The Flash, directed by Andy Muschietti, director of the It films. Ezra Miller reprises their role as Barry Allen in the DC superhero's first ever standalone feature film. Worlds collide in The Flash when Barry uses his superpowers to travel back in time in order to change the events of the past. But when his attempt to save his family inadvertently alters the future, Barry becomes trapped in a reality in which General Zod has returned, threatening annihilation, and there are no superheroes to turn to. That is, unless Barry can convince a very different Batman out of retirement and rescue an imprisoned Kryptonian, albeit not the one he's looking for. Ultimately, to save the world that he's in and return to the future that he knows. Barry's only hope is to race for his life, but will making the ultimate sacrifice be enough to reset the universe? The Flash ensemble also includes rising star Sasha Calle, Michael Shannon, Ron Livingston, Maribel Verdú, and of course, Michael Keaton. This is hitting theaters June 16th, which is tomorrow. A huge thanks to our friends at Warner Brothers Pictures Canada for inviting us out to the fan screening here in Toronto.
I will say, before we go any further, I mean, obviously we don't condone anything that Ezra's done as a person. This isn't necessarily a review of Ezra Miller, but rather the Flash, right? Because I think it's a really important thing to acknowledge that there are so many people that worked on this movie. These movies don't just come together in a night or a day. It takes a lot of people, a lot of time to make this movie. So, you know, we're obviously going to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Nate. I totally agree. You know, there's so many people that put a lot of effort into bringing this movie to life, and we're not here to talk about Ezra Miller, what's going on in his life. We are here to talk about The Flash. So with that out of the way, let's finally add our thoughts to the conversation. I'm very excited to get into it. We have just seen the movie. We are literally sitting down and recording. And yes, we are going to do a speedy review here, inspired by our titular hero. So let's get messy, guys. We're going to kick things off with what worked. And I'm actually going to throw it to Darcy, because Darcy, you are a fan of the Flash character, and I thought maybe you might be able to enlighten us about what worked for you from that aspect of being a fan of the comics.
Well, for sure. I mean, with all the teasers and the lead up to this movie, it was very clear that this was going to be the DCEU's adaptation of Flashpoint, which is one of my favorite comic stories of all time. That was the story that got me into Flash and made me want to read more about him and his character. So the one thing this movie did well, it was adapt that original source material. The Flashpoint, you know, callbacks and references in this movie are strong and they fit well, and the story really works because, again, it worked great as a comic, and the way they tell it on the screen also works. And that's saying a lot, because it is a complicated story to handle and deal with, but they managed to pull it off with what I think Marvel did very well earlier on in the MCU, where they adapted the comics in a fresh way while still staying true to that source material. And this feels very much the same.
I think the positive that I would take away from this movie is the attempt at really defining their own multiverse and how it exists in the DC, and focusing it around the Flash and what his powers in relation to what the multiverse is. I think that is, you know, we were kind of talking about it on the way back from the theater. it seems like that is the MO for most of these studios who are trying to kind of give a lot of longevity and possibilities to their intellectual property. And this definitely leans into that. That it definitely leans into what a DCU or DCEU, whatever you want to call it, multiverse kind of looks like by anchoring it with the Flash.
I think the cast in this movie, including Ezra Miller, were great. I think the performances were great. I really enjoyed the performances of the parents in the movie. I thought were really, really fantastic and endearing. And I think Michael Keaton is a delight in this movie. Obviously, it's not a spoiler to kind of say that. I think what we do get from him as Batman, for me at least, was probably my favorite part of the movie.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, he did. He was, he wore that cape and cowl like he was Batman yesterday. It was fantastic to see him back in the suit. But I agree with you, Nate. I think the cast is another positive to take away from this.
Yeah.
But Ezra Miller was actually enjoyable. I enjoyed,
and that's the disappointing part.
That is very much because the thing is that, as you mentioned, given the history of what's going on and in his private life, he was so damn good.
To see more of them as the Flash.
Exactly. I would like to see more of him as the Flash if all of that can get sorted out and thing. But at the same time, does the studio really need to do that with a movie like this, with a movie that kind of sets up the possibilities of other iterations of a Flash existing in some way? I want to shout out Sasha Cal's Supergirl. I think she was fantastic. She had such a presence. I could watch a movie of just her. I think we were talking about that. I'd love to see her story and how it kind of got to the point of where she runs into Barry. And you know what, Michael Keaton, again, I loved seeing him in the costume and seeing him return as Batman. His role was very subdued in terms of what I thought he was going to be in the trailer. I will say that. It was cool to see all the nostalgia of that era of Batman sort of reemerge. But I think this is another example, and this is kind of what maybe didn't work. Fan service for the sake of fan service.
Yep.
In a
cheap.
lot of ways.
It's nonsensical at times. There's moments where they're just kind of like, they're showing us things. It's, hey, look at this thing over, look at that, this bag or whatever. And then, and it was a lot of catering to the hardcore DC fans, which is great, I guess. But when it's done in ways that don't actually service the plot,
no, exactly,
it feels unnecessary.
Well,
it just kind of, it doesn't feel like it adds anything. And
well,
I feel like I could say that about this entire movie. I'll be honest.
Sure, I know. I don't disagree with that. I think that, again, is, as much as Darcy said, they got things right with the story, and they've done some things that work. I think a large part of this doesn't work for a multitude of different reasons. And I think with that, we should just get into what didn't work about this movie. I think the fan service, like I said, I think the fan service was heavy-handed at times. I think characters weren't like Michael Keaton were very underutilized and just served a purpose of being that nostalgia and being the sort of, again, I know Batman is like the sort of jack of all trades, but he was very much just that in this movie. And he served up his lines that were, unforgettable from the original movies that he did. But again, it's fan service for the sake of fan service. I think when you look at something where fan service is done right, we think of No Way Home. That the introduction of the multiple Peters and the importance that they had to the overall
Across
narrative.
The Spider-Verse, dude.
Oh, for sure.
It just happened.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
But
like, how can we?
Yeah, no, I think at this, sure. If you're saying about like the cameos for the fan service of how they've implemented it, sure, I totally agree. Across the Spider-Verse does handle it, but I think in terms of actually meaning something to the story, right? Like I'm not talking about some background things that you see Across the Spider-Verse. Like all three Peters in No Way Home effectively mattered to the larger story, and it doesn't feel like any of the characters really did matter to the story. Overall, it was really just about inserting them for the purpose of fan service. So I don't know. I think that was a big what didn't work for me.
And I mean, I think it's almost unfair to compare this to Across the Spider-Verse, because Across the Spider-Verse is almost built on the fact that fan service is canon. All these Spider-Men appearing on the screen together is bound to happen, and it's part of the story. Whereas, like you said, this part, the fan service is just happening so that they could get a rise out of the audience. And well, it seemed to pop off with some. It does kind of take you out of this overall, what I again thought was the story was really good, but these characters had no investment in it, or it seemed like they had no investment, especially when they introduce Michael Keaton's Batman. He's at a very different place than we saw him in the last Batman film he portrayed. It's interesting to see how they tried to bring him back, and they did all this stuff again, just fan service for the sake of being fan service. There was no, like you say, no intentional for him to be there except to be Batman, like we all saw.
And when you
before.
do that, I mean, the thing is that I enjoyed the Keaton stuff, but we're going to stay spoiler free, but there are other cameos. I mean, I don't think that's a spoiler to say about a DC movie these days. There are other cameos, but they don't mean
Matter.
anything,
They
and
don't
they don't
matter.
matter. And
Yeah.
then at the end of the day, all they do is remind me, and you know, I wouldn't consider myself a DC fan, but it reminds the DC fans in the audience of all the things that they love that are so much better than this movie. You know what I mean? Like, oh, great, yes, that's there. Oh, I remember how great that was. And is that supposed to make this movie better?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, that was something I did enjoy, because where other Marvel Multiverse, we get small snippets. It was neat in this one where they showed us a bit more of these other worlds and how they collide. It's just the way they portrayed it. And I think that goes with a lot of this movie is how they decided to use CG to do some of these scenes. And it is, I said it right as we left the theater, basically. I felt like some of those scenes I was watching a video game cutscene from 6 years ago. And I shouldn't be saying that about a DC like blockbuster.
It feels like it might be a disservice to the wonderful people who've made video games for the PlayStation 3. Okay, to say that this was PS3 cutscene. That's how bad. And I think at a certain point, I'm like, is this a stylistic choice?
It has
at this
to
point?
be.
It
Like
has to be, right?
I'm thinking it has to be at this point, because
Holy.
at the end of the day, yeah, the CGI is the single worst part about this movie. It takes you out.
100%.
It's funny. The irony of this whole situation is that this is a movie about time and time traveling. And the movie had a long period of time, it had delays and stuff like that, but yet the final product looks like it was rushed. The visual effects at times reminded me as that sort of jelly look to the people that was similar to something that you would see like with the multiple Agent Smiths.
You were saying in The Matrix,
yeah,
right?
in The Matrix,
Yeah.
or in both Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. You know, when they did those fight sequences, and you could just tell like that's not
Characters
Keanu,
were like,
that's
their
not,
arms are stretching
yeah,
at certain points in
it
this
looked
movie.
it looked rubbery. It looked very
Yeah.
rubbery and artificial. And yeah, I don't think that helped the cause of this movie. It's almost like I think this movie is made up of at least 80% or more of CGI, and it all fails. In my opinion, it all sucks. I don't understand how any of this got approved. Again, Nate, you might be right. It could be a stylistic thing because there's, you know, it's Flash, the speed, there's slow motion
Or
stuff.
was it that there were so many writers that worked on this, and this passed through so many hands
visual
that
effects,
this was made?
I don't think
But
visual
was
effects
this made? Were major story points in this movie decided upon long after it was filmed? Do you know what I mean? Like, it feels like there are certain elements to this movie that were decided way further into production.
You mean were they
caused it to
added
be
in after the
so-
fact, which is why they're so heavily CGI'd?
Yeah.
You know, that's actually that's a good note. I don't know. I think generally we'll never really have the answer until maybe Andy decides to come out and talk a little bit more about like the visual effects. But I think there's going to be there has been already conversations around the visual effects being very, very garbage.
Yes. And you were saying that for the most part, it did not work. I mean, the final fight scene, the climactic battle, did look good. You don't notice as much during that points because that seemed to be where they focused on that. And maybe that wasn't where some of these later in the game decisions were changed or whatever, because it looks like they had time to really flesh out
the
that
movie
part.
was,
but everything
I
else
think the whole
falls
movie
flat.
was leading to that point, right? So that's like it had to be in there.
Exactly. And just talking about stuff that falls flat, a lot of the comedy in this movie was so unnecessary. I mean, a quip every now and then from the hero as he's beating up a bad guy is fine, but the way that they shoehorned in comedy into action scenes or just moments where it was unnecessary dialogue to be like, just to like repeat something or to make it try and get a laugh at the audience. It just a lot of the times it was not working for me, and I was just kind of questioning why they decided to go so
There was at
comedy
least
forward.
3 times in this movie where Barry says something, and I'm like, who is Barry talking to in this part of the movie? The audience? Like, is this Deadpool? Like, what are you trying to do? And that, I think that's the other thing too, is that the dialogue, even outside of the humor, oftentimes just had me kind of scratching my head of like, why is he just saying things to confirm that this is happening? And I think there's one scene that we were all talking about that might be the only part of the movie that actually I from a humor standpoint enjoy.
No, enhanced superhuman beings were involved in the scene. It was just people, which I think is really hilarious as well. The real comedy hit with a very real moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
it wasn't an action moment. It wasn't in the middle of trying to save, a bunch of characters. It was just a simple, funny thing to do with time travel and the way that things are affected. And I think to me, they could have maybe relied on a little bit more of that style of humor. I think would have worked.
Yeah, they definitely didn't have a balance between, the humor aspect as well as the dialogue. There's elements that happen where people just say lines for the purpose of saying lines to move things forward. I think that, again, it's very obvious at times when dialogue is just a thing that needs to move the story forward. You know what I mean? And there were moments when Barry would say things or Michael Keaton would say things, or
just to confirm to the audience, like, hey, this is this part of the story's done, or whatever,
exactly,
or this
we're
is
moving
where we
this
are,
way, or something like that. So
it's really rudimentary, and like, we're talking about these characters, and we didn't get enough of them. Michael Shannon as Zod felt like such a waste in this movie. He's so fantastic. I think Michael Shannon is fantastic.
Well, he just served a purpose. It's the same thing.
Nothing.
It was nothing. And I honestly, there's not much more he could have done with that character outside of what he did with it with Man of Steel, and it was great in Man of Steel. But again, the reality of bringing that character back, but he's just redoing everything that he did before, or he's just serving the same purpose.
They could have put in any generic DC villain, and it wouldn't have changed anything.
It wouldn't have changed anything.
No.
Right? So, but yeah, I think, there's already been a lot of talk about this movie. It's getting very, mixed reactions and reviews. So, you can take our thoughts as they are because they're very mixed. But I think consensus is not all of it really worked. So with that, let's get into our final thoughts and our score, which we will rate on a scale of 1 to 5 berries. Darcy, why don't you kick it off?
Again, it might be the comic book fan in me speaking, because I want to like this movie so much because I love Flashpoint so much. Again, that was the introduction to the character that made me want to read more about him. And this movie, again, does a great job of that, where I want to see more of the Flash, Ezra Miller's The Flash, but with what's going on outside of that, who knows where that's going to be. So it's a bit disappointing to think that this might be the last time we see him on screen. And again, I enjoyed the story and the way they adapted Flashpoint and everything like that, but again, the CGI and how heavy-handed it was and how rubbery, and it really takes you out of this action scene when you're looking at someone's arm kind of morph around just to, fit the waves or whatever. I don't know. It was very odd to look at points. And then the humor, it was, again, trying to shovel down just to get the laugh, and it did not go over very well in my opinion. So I'll be giving this one 3.5 out of 5 berries. I want to give it more, but again, there is so much that took me right out of it that's where I'm going to land, I guess.
Nate, what's your final thoughts and score?
James Gunn said that this movie would reset the DCU, and it doesn't. It doesn't mean anything, in my opinion. It doesn't reset shit. Like I feel for DC fans. I feel for Andy Muschietti, who came into this mess late, and had to try to pick up these pieces, I guess, and unfortunately, I'm not saying anything new here. This isn't something that I'm just coming to realize with these movies. DC fans and these characters deserve better, and I really hope for everyone involved that James Gunn can figure out a way to, because he has taken something that didn't work and made it something that did, and I hope to see that going forward. The Flash won't be a movie that stays with me. It'll be out of my mind faster than the Flash himself. I'm giving it a 2 out of 5 berries.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you, Darcy. I think that there's stuff that works about this movie. I loved seeing Michael Keaton. Like I said, that was my first Batman. That worked for me. But again, very underutilized. Supergirl, Sasha Calle was fantastic. Not enough of her as well. So see, now I'm already getting into the negatives. I think where this movie really struggles is obviously it's a huge disappointment from the visual effects standpoint, and a reliance on excessive silly humor that just didn't really make sense in some instances. I think the underwhelming CGI really just failed to capture anything inspiring about this Speedy titular character. I think that it left me underwhelmed in a lot of ways, and I think that the forced jokes detach from the story's emotional side in a lot of ways. I think the emotional tone, they should have leaned into that a lot more in a lot of ways. And there are some redeeming qualities, as I was mentioning, but it fell short of delivering anything that I was hoping that would be great for the DCU. And the thing is that I think from a standpoint, as you were mentioning, Nate, characters and stories, I think that there's a difference, because we obviously heard a lot of fans in our fan screening, because it was a fan screening.
We heard them a lot.
Yeah, we heard them a lot. People liked certain elements and pop. And I actually think that this will be a hit for DC fans. I just don't think that this is a hit for the fans that appreciate a balance and a sort of finesse and art to how you bring this superhero stuff to life with relatable emotional moments. Like, again, the stuff that with Barry and how Ezra, they did a fantastic job bringing some emotional depth to the character, but the heavy-handed jokes, the sort of forced dialogue to move things forward, the rubbery, awful CGI. Yeah, I'm giving this a 2.5 out of 5 berries. I'm low on the bar, so
on the berry bar.
On the berry bar. I'm not it. So, well, that is it for this Flash spoiler-free review. We hope you enjoyed, and if you did, feel free to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to reach out to us and let us know your thoughts about this movie, were we too harsh or are we all right? Let us know at wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. That's wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. Or you can hit us up on Twitter at GeekcentricYT or on Instagram at wearegeekcentric. Keep in mind, we have a ton of other great content covering the latest movies and TV shows from the Geekiverse, like our most recent spoiler-free review for Disney and Pixar's Elemental, which is also coming out on June 16th, tomorrow. So you can check out our spoiler-free review. And we also dropped a fantastic interview with that director, Peter Sohn, which you can watch both on YouTube at youtube.com/geekcentric, or you can listen to it on podcast feeds. Nate and I kind of chat a little bit more on the podcast episode about what that experience was like, because it was really great to sit down with Peter Sohn. But it is the hot geek summer, so we got spoiler-free reviews for all the latest and greatest movies that are currently in theaters, as well as some spoiler-filled, like our spoiler-filled review for Across the Spider-Verse. We also have some Secret Invasion stuff coming next week, so stay tuned for that. And finally, we have now opened up our Discord so that we can start chatting with all of the listeners out there that want to join us and share their thoughts on some of the spoilers from some of these movies. We will have a spoiler-filled section for The Flash that will go up so people can share their thoughts there. We'll probably have one for Elemental for all the Easter eggs. So come join us, because we are Geekcentric and you can be too. But yeah, more episodes coming. So until then, Darcy, Nate, thank you so much for joining me for this spoiler-free review for The Flash. And as we say,
love ya.
Laters.
Peace.